Alright guys, welcome back to the next series of videos covering Unit 2 Outcome 1, and there's 5 key knowledge dot points in this particular outcome, and this is all on the legal and financial considerations when we are establishing our business. And this first particular key knowledge is on legal requirements. So here is, for the first time, you see the study design for this outcome. So there you can see your 5 key knowledge dot points. So today we are looking at that first one, as I said, an overview of legal requirements for establishing a business, such as, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff. So actually this video will be the longest in this outcome, because you can see there, like, there's a fair bit in the script. Okay, so there's a fair bit of stuff that it says that we need to cover. So not a hugely long video, but this will be the longest of the 5, I would imagine. So what's this particular key knowledge all about? Look, as a new business owner, you basically need to be aware of all the laws that are going to be relevant to your business as you're setting up the business, but then also for the life of the business as well. And this is not a new concept. We kind of touched on this earlier in the year in Unit 1. It's the owner of the business. It's their responsibility to basically make sure that this happens. And you've got to make sure that them or the business does not face any legal consequences of breaking any laws. So this is all about just being aware of the law and then making sure that you are operating within the law. Just, a business the same as, a citizen, exactly the same difference. So when I just mentioned before about the script, so in that study design key knowledge dot point, basically it referred to a bunch of different areas. So again, this is just what the study design says. There are lots of different ways you could categorize, the legal requirements for a business, but this is just how the study design does it. So these 5 things are what we're going to talk about in this video, what you could be tested on, basically. So those are the 5 things we're now going to talk through in turn to give you a bit of information on, so you have some awareness of them. So the first one, registering the business name. Okay. The business name, very simply, the title that the business operates with and the name that customers use to refer to that particular business. Okay, if you had to define business name. Now, the law requires that all businesses operating in Victoria operate their business under a business name. Okay, so you have to have a business name. ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, holds a registry, a list of all business names within the online business name register on their website. So if you just Googled ASIC, you go to their website. Within that website, you'd find the online business name register. That's where all business names in Australia are held. Now, if you are using a personal name as your business name, so just my name, Matt Piggott, and you're going to be operating as a sole trader, remember the different types of legal business structure in Unit 1, then you do not actually need to register the name. You'll still use that name, but you don't actually need to legally register it. Okay, so if you're a sole trader and you're only using your name, don't need to register it. So important to bear that in mind. But if you add anything else into that name, or if you're going to actually operate as a private limited company as opposed to operating as a sole trader, then you do need to register the name. Okay, so for example, when I say adding stuff in, so for example, Matt Piggott & Co., Matt Piggott & Sons, if you're changing it in any way, shape or form from just your basic name, then you would need to register it. So it's really important to recognize that distinction. Now, the process of registering a business name, just the other thing that I'm going to cover when we're talking about this registering a business name, just a couple of steps you need to go through that you might need to explain. So step 1, select an appropriate name. Now, when we say appropriate, you want something that's memorable, something that's easy to pronounce and spell, something original, something appropriate, professional and non-offensive. all that sort of stuff. So you've got to come up with a decent business name. Okay. So step one, select yourself an appropriate business name. Step two, you need to get an ABN, an Australian business number. All you would do here is go on to the Australian Business Register website and you click on how to apply. And, like everything these days, via the internet, all very straightforward. An ABN, just so you're aware, look, whenever you buy something and you get a receipt, the ABN is always on the receipt, the ABN of that business that you're buying from. So you can see these two. There's a Coles and a Woolies receipt here, and there you can see the ABNs for Coles and for Woolies. So it's just part of the legal documentation that needs to be included on a receipt. But that's where so if you've ever wondered if you ever looked at a receipt and you've seen ABN and then a whole series of numbers, that's what we're talking about. It's that business's Australian business number. So once we've done that, then we can actually register our name. So we've selected an appropriate name. We've got our ABN. Once we've got those two things, we can now go to the ASIC website. And again, just click on register name and go through the process. Okay, it's as simple as that. The second one on our script, our list of legal requirements, was registering a website domain. Now, this is a bit of a weird one because clearly it's not a legal requirement to register a website. If you're going to operate a business, you don't legally have to have a website. But the reality is, who's going to operate a business without a website these days? It's essentially free to set one up. If you just use a website builder, you want to be findable. So the reality is you would have some kind of a website, but it isn't actually a legal requirement. But where the legality comes in here is not so much in the legal requirement to have a website, but there is some legality around which domain name that you can actually use. Okay, so all you do is go to this website here, Order. You go to that website and you just basically make sure that the website domain that you want to use hasn't already been taken or trademarked. Okay, simple as that. So that's the legality. The legality isn't in legally you have to have a website, but the legality is the website domain name that you're going to choose. Okay. Moving on to the third one on our script from the study design key knowledge dot point. Trade practices legislation. What we're talking about here is just laws that govern how a business interacts with its customers, competitors, and any other stakeholders that it needs to have interactions with. Okay, now these are going to vary from business to business, industry to industry, sector to sector, but they're always going to be various bits of trade practice legislation that any business is going to have to adhere to. So just some examples to put this in context for you. Local government bylaws would be one. So these are going to vary according to which local council area that your business is operating in. So for example, Nillumbik, Banyul around here. And it might include such things as building, planning, zoning laws. And again, we touched on this much earlier in the course as well. There's lots and lots of permits you need from council if you want to do any kind of building, renovating, anything like that. So this would cover that type of eventuality. Some other examples would be licenses and permits. And again, this is not new to us. We looked at this earlier in the year. So your liquor licenses if you're going to sell alcohol, food premises registration if you're going to have any kind of a food operation within your business, APRA copyright licensing, so play music. So if you want to play music in your venue, if you've got a restaurant, a bar, a cafe, whatever, legally, you can't just play music, okay? You need to get a license for playing music, and there's different types of licenses depending on what type of music that you want to play. Local council permits for footpath seating. So if you've got a cafe, you can't just stick tables and chairs outside. You would need to get a permit from the council to allow you to do that. All this sort of stuff. And then, of course, skilled professionals and tradespeople also need licenses to be able to actually operate. Doctors, accountants, lawyers, but also tradies, plumbers, electricians, all that sort of thing. They need certification and licenses to actually be able to operate in that trade. Okay. Third one you could talk about would be, for example, occupational health and safety laws. All Australian employees have a legal right to a safe workplace, and legally employers have to provide this. We have the OH&S Act 2004 guiding us in Victoria. And WorkSafe Victoria is the government department that looks after that area and that kind of piece of legislation. Fourth one, employment laws. Okay, so there's a multitude of employment or workplace relation laws set by both state and federal governments, and all employers must adhere to these. So this is not industry specific. All employers have to adhere by this set of employment laws. So again, it's something, if you've got a small business, you're going to start employing people, you need to be aware of what you can and can't do in relation to the employment of those people. And it is the Fair Work Commission, the FWC, that is the federal body that looks after this area of law predominantly. And the fifth one I'm going to talk about briefly is consumer laws. So as a business operator, you must be aware of your rights as the business operator and the rights of the consumers that buy from you in regard to a whole bunch of stuff such as consumer guarantees, product returns, contracts, labeling, misleading and deceptive conduct, all that kind of stuff. A whole bunch of things you need to be aware of. So it's being aware of your rights as a business owner and the rights that anybody that buys from you also has. And the key piece of legislation to be aware of here is Australian consumer law. And I've talked about this in my classes. It's one of my favourite pieces of legislation we have here in Australia. It's actually quite unusual. Australians consumers are very, very much protected by law in a way that consumers in other countries are not, which is great for consumers. You could argue perhaps not so good for business owners. But the point is business owners need to be aware of ACL, Australian consumer law, so that they're not falling foul of any of the stuff within it. And here's just a real snapshot. Okay, ACL is quite a big piece of law, but this is basically what it says. Consumers are entitled to whenever they buy anything, and you can see purchases up to $40,000 for domestic, household, or personal use. So this doesn't necessarily cover large business expenses, but if you're selling to individual consumers, anything up to $40,000, this kind of has to apply. So whatever you sell must be of acceptable quality, must be able to be used for its intended purpose, so on and so forth down that little list there. Okay. Now, important to note that the consumer guarantee offered by Australian consumer law is separate from a supplier's warranty. Okay, so when you buy an item, pretty much any item, it's got a warranty or a guarantee associated with it. 12 months is pretty common. It might be 24, it might be 3 years. Most cars these days, it used to be between 1 and 3 years was a standard car warranty length. Then some of the Korean brands, Kia, Hyundai, started really pushing that out, and they went to 7. Now most brands have gone to a 5-year. So it's the industry standard in cars now seems to be a 5-year warranty. You still have some that have a bit longer, 7 or even 10 years. And most domestic goods, like if you go to JB Hi-Fi or Harvey Norman, most of the kind of gear that you would buy from those kinds of stores, 12 months is pretty much the normal guarantee that you get. They will try to sell you an extension up to 24 or 36 months and charge you several $100s often for the privilege. And like I've said to you in class, never ever do that because you're already covered through Australian consumer law anyway. So those extended warranties that they try to sell you are not worth the paper they are written on. An Australian consumer guarantee always trumps supplier or manufacturer warranties. So you could argue, and again, I've talked about this in class a bit, that the guarantees that you get from a shop when you buy a product is sort of almost worthless. It isn't quite true because it really kind of depends on if the business, how far they want to go in upholding the law, but reality is they should be effectively worthless because we're already protected by Australian consumer law. The fourth, going back to the fourth kind of part of the script within our key knowledge dot point was business tax compliant. Look, very simple. Tax compliance, the extent to which an individual or a business meets its tax obligations. So in other words, whether or not that you pay your tax. Very, very famous saying there, said in this word, only 2 things in life are certain: Death and Taxes, Benjamin Franklin. So look, it's a legal requirement for all businesses to pay tax, and this is all governed by the ATO, the Australian Tax Office. And how tax is paid and how much you pay could depend on what type of business structure you're using, and how much profits that you're making, basically. But it will all be stipulated within the rules. You have to pay whatever is due. Whatever you're liable to pay, you need to pay. And the fifth, I think the final key knowledge dot point mentioned, or within the key knowledge dot point, was WorkSafe insurance. So look, Workcover, compulsory insurance scheme employers pay into on behalf of their employees. This provides an income and compensation for employees and or their families in the event of injury, disability or death in the workplace. So all employers have to pay into this fund, and the amount that they pay, so the premium that pay, will depend on the level of risk in that particular workplace. So for example, a factory with lots of machinery that could injure people is going to be paying a larger premium, Workcover premium, than say, a law office or an accounting office where there's minimal risk of injuring people. And this whole area is managed by WorkSafe Victoria. And that is it. So I said it's a long video, not too long, but make sure you've got a really good set of notes for that one so you can draw on any of the content that I've just talked about and covered. And I will see you in the next video for Key Knowledge 2, which will be financial requirements. I'll see you then. Cheers for now.